As I said, each one of us sitting over here or watching wants to be successful, or even more successful than where we are today, because mankind has been wanting to be successful from the very beginning. There were many postulates, many theories. First, people said that it is only tall people who can become successful. But all the Hitlers, all the Napoleons were very, very short. This theory was debunked. Then they said it is only the whites or only the Caucasoids who can become successful. But that theory was debunked, because we've seen colored people from all across the world who've been very, very successful. The next postulate that came into existence was that it is only males who can be successful. It is only men who can be successful. But we've seen that females have left males far behind in so many domains. They've notched up success ratios greater than male ratios in so many domains. So that postulate was also debunked. Ultimately, the realization dawned that success doesn't depend upon physicality. Success depends upon something else. That something else is what exists over here, which is the mindset. It is the mind which is all powerful. And then began what is called as study of the mind, which we all, in modern terms, in modern parlance or modern language, which we understand as neuroscience, which is the study of the mind. There were many scientists, but one man goes down in the history of neuroscience as the man who has given path-breaking results. His name was Dr. Joseph Murphy. Dr. Joseph Murphy's books are very, very famous, because he was extolling, or he was studying the powers of the mind. In one book which I read, and I was startled, I was gripped, in fact I was riveted by the way he wrote the book. It was the beginning, when he says that yes, today the world respects me or acknowledges Dr. Murphy as a great scientist of the mind, but he says, I go back to my childhood. He says, my parents expired when I was very, very young. I was a small child. He says, I used to stay with my grandmother. And he says, I still remember I was maybe in grade class 7, 11 or 12 years old, staying with my grandmother. And then he says, I was in school. I was a member of the movement called as the Scout movement. Boy Scouts, we all know, many of us must have been. And Girl Guides. So he says, I was a proud Boy Scout, and one day I was told that tomorrow we have to attend a scouting camp. And where is the camp? The camp is around 100 kilometers from my house, and it is a 5-day camp. And he says, we were told that we have to reach the camp at 7 a.m. sharp in the morning. We have to be there, 100 kilometers away. And he says, we also were given a warning by the teacher that if by any chance anybody is late, he will not be allowed, and he or she will not be allowed into the class. No camp, no exams, and we'll repeat the class. As children, all of us have been petrified of our teachers. He says he also was. So he says, 7 o'clock to reach there, 100 kilometers. And he says he was getting ready for the camp, and then suddenly at around 11 o'clock when he was packing, he ran to his grandmother and he says, grandmother, I forgot one thing. She says, what, child? He says, tomorrow I have to be 100 kilometers away at 7. The bus is going to come at 5. The bus is not going to come at 7 o'clock as it normally comes. 7 I have to be over there. The bus will come at 5. Grandmother, you'll have to wake me up at 4 o'clock. You don't have to wake me up at 6 o'clock as you do normally, because the bus is going to come at 5 and I have to reach over there at 7. Grandmother looked at him and she said, child, I can't promise you, because I myself get up at 6 o'clock. The first thing that I do is I wake you up. I cannot promise you. So he says, grandmother, what should I do? You set up the alarm. Grandmother looked at him and with a touch of remorse, she said, Joseph, I'm an old lady. I don't understand these mechanical contraptions. I can't set up the alarm. Why don't you try? He was a child. He says, I didn't know how to set up the alarm. I looked at her and said, I also don't know. What should I do, grandmother? She says, there's only one way out. That way is go to the neighbors. Tell the neighbors and the neighbors will wake you up. He says, I looked around and pitch dark. Lights were off. He says, I did not have the guts, the courage, the audacity or the impunity to wake up my neighbors. He says, I looked at my grandmother sheepishly. And he says, grandmother, no way out. There's only one way out, and that way is I will not sleep tonight. She looked at him and she smiled. She said, Joseph, you're a small child. You're only 11 years old. Joseph, you will fall sick if you don't sleep. You must sleep. He says, grandmother, but if I don't wake up in time, how do I reach? I reach late, no camp, no exams, and a failure. That is not possible. I will not be able to tolerate that. He said, what do I do? She says, there is one way. What way? He asked her. And she said, one way. What, grandmother? Tell the pillow. And the pillow will wake you up. He looked at her sheepishly and he said, grandmother, this is not the time for jokes. How can the pillow wake me up? She says, no, Joseph, you tell the pillow and the pillow will wake you up. She was serious. And he says, I had no other option. Marta kya na karta. He says, I looked at the pillow. Lifeless as it was, I said, wake me up at 5. He looked at the pillow, then he looked at his grandmother. Grandmother says, no. Tell the pillow I will get up at 5. I will get up at 5, lifeless pillow over there. She says louder. I will get up at 5. Joseph even louder. I will get up at 5. That's but about Joseph one more time, final time, and louder this time. And he said, I will get up at 5. She says, good, now go to sleep. And he says, I was tired, I was tense. 30 seconds, I was transported to a world which was the world of sleep, a different world altogether. And he says, suddenly I awoke, my eyes were awake. How long I had slept, I was not aware. But then within 30 seconds, all the events of last night flashed past my mind, and my heart started pounding, my heart started beating, my heart started thumping, my heart started palpitating, because now I knew that the clock on the wall by my right side is going to tell me what my fate is today. And he says, with a thumping heart, I turned my head towards the clock. And he says, presto. It was 4:59. And he says, exactly 4:59. And he says, exactly 5 o'clock. The pillow had woken me up, perhaps. He says, I was up in time, I got ready, I took the bus, I attended the camp, did well in the camp, did well in my exams, always did well in academics. I went on to become a doctor, a celebrated doctor. But one thing rankled my mind all the time, even after my studies. How could the pillow wake me up? And he says, I started delving into details. How did the pillow wake me up? And then he says, I did research and I had my answer. And my answer was, what had woken me up was not my pillow. What had woken me up was my subconscious mind. Right? So he says, yes, what woke me up was my subconscious mind. And I started delving into details of the subconscious mind. And then he says, came the startling revelation that all power, almost 88% of the power is manifested with this subconscious mind. 12% is a conscious mind, which we understand as our mind, our willpower, which we understand, our analytical power, our reasoning power, our short-term memory, all that is in the conscious mind. But a common man understands this as the complete mind. But he says 88% of the power is vested over there, here. 88% of the power is vested over here. That is the subconscious mind. And he says, I started studying. A medical doctor I was. Can I realize these powers of the subconscious mind? Because if it can wake me up, I'm sure it has got other powers also. And then began his studies, and the book, one of the biggest bestsellers in the powers of the mind, The Power of the Subconscious Mind by Dr. Joseph Murphy, was published.